Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about nations and states. So, we've been talking about law and the different types of law, and we're talking about, governments that exist within the United States. And of course, a government is an institution that makes and enforces law. And we know that because the United States makes and enforces law, they have a government. In this case, we have a democratically elected um, executive, the president, and Congress, headed by the Speaker of the House, and then, of course, a nominated and approved Supreme Court. We know that there are three powers of government: the power to make law, which is the legislative; the power to enforce law, which is executive; the power to interpret law, that is judicial. Now, how does that come together? Laws, government, how does it come together to create a country? Basically, what must a country have or else it's not a country? Well, let's start with the difference between country, nation, and state, because a lot of the people get this kind of mixed up. Here is the United States of America. In the United States of America, there are people that identify pretty much above all else as Americans. And so that is something that we have in common in this area, is that we are all Americans. Therefore, America is a nation. It is a nation in that it is an area where a group of people have a common identity. That common identity is we see ourselves as Americans, not because we have government, not all these other things. It's basically, first and foremost, it's because we are Americans. You can have a nation and be somewhere else other than a country, though. You can be within countries. So here in the United States, even locally, we have the sovereign nation of Pinoleville, sovereign nation. What do those groups have in common? They are Pomo. We have the Navajo Nation, the biggest Native American reservation in the United States. The Navajo Nation has something in common. They are primarily Navajo. So that's their commonality. If we go out into other countries, here's a bunch of countries: Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran. And within these countries, there is actually a hidden nation. It is a group known as the Kurds. Uh, the Kurds believe this area is actually Kurdistan. Even though it's not officially a country, they see themselves as a nation. And since they have the fact that they are Kurds in common, that's why it is considered a nation. And there's even political scientists that over time have said that, like, the world is actually not divided up into countries; it's actually divided up into nations. That you have a Japanese kind of nation, and an Orthodox Eastern European nation, Islamic nation, African nation. You have these groups of people that kind of identify as a similarity. And of course, Europe, the United States, Australia, what do they have in common? They see themselves as the West, kind of the free market, free civil liberties, democracy, democratic countries. All right, so these are nations. Even on a smaller scale, sports teams give themselves, the identification of a nation. We have Raider Nation. What do they all have in common? They're all losers. Okay, now, so then if that's a nation, what is a state? People think that a state is like California, Nevada, Oregon. That's not true. A state is a group of people living in a defined border with the power to make and enforce law. Now, you have thought this is called a country, and it is. A state is actually a country. Of course, the United States is a collection. If we go back to the founding of the country, it is a collection of independent states that decided in the 1770s, let's come together and become a United States. So those things that you think are called countries, in political science, we call them the state or states. So it is a group of people living in a defined border with the power to make and enforce the law. Meaning the United States is not just a nation, we see ourselves as Americans, but also a state. It's that group of people that have defined borders that can make and enforce laws. Okay, now, to know that you have a state, there are four things that every state must have. And if you can check, how do I know that this place is a country, is a state? Well, these four things have to exist. Number one, you must have a population, meaning a group of people must actually reside, meaning live at that place. Okay. Now, the largest state based on population in the world is India. They have 1.5 billion people. A lot of them are mainly jammed up north in these territories. But if you're asked, like, what is the most populous country on earth, the most populous state on earth, it is India. The smallest state on earth is Vatican City. It actually has a population of 825 people, and that's it. It is located within the city of Rome in Italy. So if you're saying, like, well, wait a minute, so this is a state within a state, the answer is that is, in fact, exactly what it is. It is the home of the Pope, the head of the Catholic Church, and that is Vatican City. It's also known as the Holy See, okay? And that is HOLYSEE. Okay. Now, number two, you must have borders, and you have to have defined borders that people actually acknowledge as borders. If you don't have borders, you do not have a country, meaning you do not have a state. Okay? Now, that doesn't mean those borders have to be massively defended. They can be, but you actually have to have respected borders that other people agree with. The most closed borders in the world belong to the border of North Korea and South Korea. And you can really definitively tell the border, which is between a place that is currently at a ceasefire, these two countries, North and South Korea, but you can tell which is the democratic part of Korea and the dictatorial part of Korea, the wealthy part and the poorer part. And this where the lights are right down here. This is South Korea. Here's the border. Everything up here, it is a very, very poor country. It is a dictatorship, North Korea. You can easily see the defined border right here. And then, of course, to the north here, this is the North Korean border with China. Okay. So you have to have defined borders, but open borders here, the most open borders in the world belong to the European Union. It is a collection of states that have agreed to open up their borders for free trade and free immigration. So you literally could walk down here from the very southern tip of Spain and walk through the entirety of Europe all the way up to the tip of Finland. And you would never need, if you're a European citizen, you'd never have to show a passport, go through any duties or terminals or anything. Just walk right on up. Okay. And this is like actually the European border between the Netherlands and Belgium. That's the border right there. You don't have anything. It's like you go into the restaurant. That's it. Okay. The next thing you need is you need to have government. You need to have an institution that actually makes and enforces the laws of the land. That government can look different. You can have different people that make and enforce that law, but you have to have some kind of government structure. So, of course, we have democratic governments where that power is ruled by the people through elections and separated, or authoritarian governments where that power is concentrated into one group. Here are the worst, the least democratic, the most authoritarian places on earth in terms of governments. We have the Russian occupied Ukrainian territory, South Sudan, Turkmenistan, Sudan. The Gaza Strip is number 5, Eritrea, North Korea, Syria, the Central African Republic, and Equatorial Guyana. The most democratic countries: Finland, New Zealand, Sweden, Norway, San Marino, one of the smallest countries also on earth, Netherlands, Luxembourg, Ireland, Denmark, and Canada. Notice the United States is not on here. The Independent Freedom House, which measures democratic governments around the world, pardon me, they rank the United States number 57 out of 105 countries. Some of it's due to political violence, the election denialism, the fact that the chief executive refused to accept the 2020 election. You had intimidation against election officials in the last election. Hate crimes are on the rise, anti LGBTQ laws, censorship of some education curriculum, attacks on press freedom, the treatment of immigrants, and increasing corruption with government officials. So, when you look at Western Europe, Canada, they have the most democratic countries on earth. The United States has a little work to do to be. It is still a democracy, make no mistake, and it's still a strong democracy, but we can do better. The last thing that every country needs is sovereignty. And sovereignty, notice the arrows. Sovereignty is absolute power within your own borders. Other countries acknowledge that you are a country, and they acknowledge that the borders of those countries cannot be crossed without consequence. So if you're Russia and you start sending bombers around Alaska, you're going to meet up with the American military because the American military says, no way, sucker, we have sovereignty. So once you get this close to the United States up in Alaska, you're going to see how that sovereignty, reacts to you trying to come and approach our absolute power within our own borders. Only the United States people and the United States government have power within their borders. This is what's been going on with Ukraine. Basically, Russia invaded a sovereign country. There were absolute borders here that the entire world accepts belong to Ukraine. Russia simply attacked, invaded, and started to gobble them up. Of course, this is why a lot of countries fight a war, because they believe that their sovereign right to exist is paramount. So, remember, a nation is a group of people with common identities, and then within those nations are going to be people that maybe build a government, that kind of thing. But a state is when you take population, borders, government, and that absolute power, that absolute right to rule, sovereignty. You put it all together, you have a state, otherwise known as a country.